Harvey, you made the case, or started to make the case, that securing such an economic Bill of Rights was vital in order to save democracy. Just lay out for us in explicit terms how you see these things as being connected.
Well, okay. I mean, for 45 years, we have witnessed nothing less than a class war on the working class. I mean, it began during the 1970s, and tragically so, it began actually in the Democratic Party with Jimmy Carter. Okay, in 1978, he turned his back on the environmental movement, the labor movement, the consumer rights movement, and he pursued a decidedly what we now call neoliberal agenda: deregulation, lowering of taxes, and in fact brought Volcker into the Federal Reserve and drove up unemployment dramatically, which utterly undermined labor and essentially bolstered the efforts throughout the decade by big business to smash labor. Okay, so I mean, it was really 45 years this went on. I mean, Carter. Let's not even talk about the Republicans. Republicans do what Republicans do, okay? They will always seek to smash labor. They will always seek to deregulate business. They will always seek to limit government. They will always seek to lower taxes, as we've seen. But the Democrats themselves, over and over again, acted as if they were really, at best, Republicans. I mean, think about, well, I said Carter. Think about the Clinton years. Think about the Obama years. It got to the point, and I'll speak on behalf of my fellow Wisconsinites who had to endure as well the Scott Walker and Republican legislature, which is still actually in power. It's the case that they stripped people of their rights. They declared war on the democratic achievements of the 30s and the 60s, and the Democrats with neoliberalism did the same. Okay, and as a consequence, working people, okay, undeniably, especially white working people, but working people generally, wanted to punch the Democrats in the nose. And of course, I mean, seriously speaking, I'm talking to people who just literally wanted to do that. And then, of course, when in 2016, we saw how the Democratic establishment and the corporate order crushed Bernie's campaign. And, you know, I mean, how many people told me, my students who would say, you know, my parents would have voted for Trump, for Bernie, but they voted for Trump. Okay, because Hillary's not to be trusted. You know, look at what the Clintons do. So then the next time around in 2020, well, you and I went through that together in some ways when I was a guest on Rising. It was astonishing. So what's the cure, so to speak? Well, the cure is for the Democratic Party, which I have little confidence the leadership would pursue this, but for the Democratic Party, propelled by progressive activism, to recover, to restore, to redeem the very vision and the very agenda that literally created the great, as Kyle was saying, you know, a series of successful presidential campaigns that lifted up Americans, that actually reduced inequality. In fact, it began a reduction of inequality that extended from the late 1930s into the early 1970s, that witnessed Social Security, an active labor movement, the creation of rights for not only whites in the South, but rights for African Americans. I mean, we could just go through the list. So, I mean, right now, the Democratic Party is literally the Republican Party of the past. The Republicans are the party of the 19th century. And if we do not advance a vision that challenges this order and that engages the American imagination, which is fundamentally, to my mind, progressive, if not radical, then we will actually see a debacle in November and even worse in 2024.
Now, by the way, what you're saying is quite literal, because there's a famous clip of Obama. I don't know why it's not more famous than it is, but he admits, like, yeah, my politics are that of like a 1980s moderate Republican. Like, he just comes out and says it. So you actually taught me something there that I did not know. I thought that really the full corporatization of the Democratic Party happened with Bill Clinton and the DLC in the early 90s, but apparently Jimmy Carter actually started moving in that direction, and then I guess Clinton just put it on steroids. So, Alan, tell me and tell the audience a story about FDR taking on entrenched power and winning, and something that people wouldn't know, but if they heard about it now, they'd think, I can't imagine like Joe Biden doing that or Barack Obama doing that.
Well, obviously, I welcome their hatred, is the famous quote from FDR. But I really do have to defer and toss that question over to the historian of FDR, who's in our midst, Harvey Kaye. Why don't you take a crack at that one, Harvey, because I think you can do a more thorough job than I can.
Okay. The rich in America thought that they expected things to happen in the New Deal, but they figured that if they supported FDR, that they would actually avoid getting their taxes raised because FDR would end prohibition and you could tax alcohol and beer, and you could actually just tax beer. And they were shocked to discover that in the National Industrial Recovery Act included which accompanied later by the end of prohibition. They discovered that FDR, this is in 1933 in the National Industrial Recovery Act, they discovered that included the right of workers to organize, which later had to be really enforced in the National Labor Relations Act. It included the raising of taxes. And for all of the efforts of FDR to include capital inside of the recovery effort, it was the case that he also, for every one of these initiatives, he included either consumer activism in it, consumer voices, labor voices, farmers' voices. So they got to the point where they realized they were in trouble. And in 1934 and 35, they created the American Liberty League. And the American Liberty League declared war on FDR. They spent, huge sums of money to try to bring down his presidency. There were even those who conspired to possibly overthrow him in a coup d'etat. Well, what they failed to do is they failed to mobilize any grassroots. They were incapable of speaking to the American working class, and the American working class was already enamored with the New Deal. So as Alan said, there came that moment in the campaign of 1936 in which FDR turned around and said, hey, look, I welcome their hatred. But there's a really great line in the speech that when he accepts the nomination anew in 1936 for the Democratic Party campaign. And he said, basically these economic royalists complain that we want to overthrow American institutions. And I'll paraphrase and say, no, it really is the case. We want to overthrow their power. He was blunt about it. So, the working class loved him for that very reason. There was a great letter that a textile worker down in the Carolinas sent to the White House. Said, you're my president. My boss is a son of a bitch.